Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Nina Huntemann, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer of CHEG. And I'm really thrilled that you are all here and that my fellow panelists are here. Obviously, you've already heard, always on, learning in the age of AI and technology. What I'm particularly excited about with this panel is that we actually have three very well-versed experts in AI and education. They did not just discover it last November, like many of the rest of us. They've actually been working in this field for a very long time, and I'm thrilled that they're bringing their expertise and perspectives to us today. I'm going to be brief in my introductions of them because what we really want to do is to get into the conversation. But before I do, I've been asked by the panelists, if we can see, we'd like to get a sense of who's in the audience. So I'm going to ask some questions and ask you to raise your hands. So I'd love to know how many K through 12 teachers are in the room. Hands up. Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, yes, big applause for K through 12 teachers. How about university professors, teachers, instructional staff?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay. And how about administrators of K through 12, those who oversee procurement? Okay, great. Fewer, also clapping. And then same thing for higher ed. How many sort of administrators, staff? Okay, great, wonderful. Finally, not least, since I'm in ed tech too, how many folks from ed tech do I have in the room? Okay, fantastic. Okay. Oh, students, I hope so. Any students in the room? Yes, big hand of applause for students. Thank you, Thomas. Okay, thank you so much for that. All right, so very briefly, as I said, introductions. So down the line, first here we have Dr. Rosemary Luckin. She's a professor of learner-centered design at the University of College London's Knowledge Lab. Her research involves the design and evaluation of educational technology using theories from the learning sciences and techniques from artificial intelligence. Next, Dr. Paul Kim is the Chief Technology Officer and Associate Dean of the Graduate School of Education at Stanford. He's an educational technology entrepreneur. Paul leads initiatives involving the design of learning technologies, educational research, and community development. And he has developed AI and ed tech in the past. And then finally, Dr. Thomas Lancaster, Senior Teaching Fellow in Computing at Imperial College London. He is an experienced academic integrity researcher, software engineer, international speaker, and ed tech enthusiast. So please welcome my panelists. So I'm going to try to assume nothing in my questions so we can sort of all level set, really. Just briefly, and I'm sure before every AI panel here at South by and maybe even at other conferences, someone starts like this, so apologies, but many of us got a firsthand experience of the power of AI last November when ChatGPT was unleashed to the world, depending on your perspective. But I think what's really important is to know that AI in education has actually been around for a while. So I've asked Rose to take some time to help us all understand briefly, not so briefly, I suppose, how artificial intelligence has already been part of the educational landscape. Rose?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nina. And it's lovely to be here, and it's great to have an audience with such a great diversity of participation. Brilliant. So you can see that I'm of mature years. Yes? And I've been working in AI and education for all of my academic career, which tells you how long we've been looking at artificial intelligence and education. Now, it's developed during that time, but we've certainly been around for many decades, let me put it that way. And everyone in this room, I'm sure, will have been using AI before November last year. And I think a useful way to think about what you might have been doing is to look at two particularly important features of artificial intelligence, and that is adaptivity and autonomy. So the feature of adaptivity that AI enables within software means that we can build adaptive pathways for students. So you have pieces of software, you might learn Spanish or English or math or physics, and the software will adapt to the individual needs of the students. And these kind of systems have been around for a while. And they've been demonstrated, if they're well designed that is, to be effective. In fact, academic research has shown that such systems can be as effective as a human tutor when teaching a group of students. The software works at an individual level. We haven't quite got to the stage where the software is as good as a human doing one-to-one tuition. But let's face it, how many students get a one-to-one human tuition situation? So these things can be super useful. We also have that autonomy piece that I mentioned. So these pieces of software can go off and make these decisions about whether a student should follow one pathway or another, how much support that student should be given. So these can be super helpful. They don't replace the human teacher, but they can certainly be incredibly useful. Now, over the years, we've also managed to build systems that can take notice of lots of different sorts of data as students interact. Not just what they type in through a keyboard or through a touch screen, but perhaps their facial expressions, perhaps where they're fidgeting about, perhaps some physiological features. And so the AI can help the software respond to a student who's perhaps anxious. And that anxiety is being picked up because the AI is able to interpret facial expressions, to interpret tone of voice, speed, pace, all of these different ways in which data that can be collected can be analysed by AI to enable that AI to adapt to what the student needs. This is true for teachers too. We have systems that can help teachers pick the right resources for their students. So this kind of technology has been around for many years. Then there are also the sorts of tools that we use in our everyday life. I mean, one of the things I find incredibly useful is dictation. I speak into my phone and the words appear on the screen. And these days, it's actually pretty accurate. That saves me loads of typing. In fact, I was going to say the last book I wrote, but actually it was the one before last. 75% of that I wrote through dictating, not through typing in. So there's also those sorts of forms of AI that we use that does that, taking the words we say and putting it down in front of us. And of course, there's translation. Google Translate, how useful is that when we're all on holiday? All of these sorts of forms of AI have also been used in education. Voice-activated interfaces, very useful in language teaching. So AI has been out there in classrooms, in lecture halls, in our lives as teachers and learners for quite a long time. It's not new. But generative AI, which is what ChatGPT is newer. Now, even that has been around for a couple of years. But it does do something slightly different in that if I compare it to that example of me dictating and my words appearing on my phone or on my laptop screen, that is just very clever, but it's my audio of my voice being translated, processed, and converted into words on the screen. Generative AI is different because it generates something fresh. I'm being very careful here not to say new, because it isn't necessarily new, but it is generating something different. And that has changed the game. Now, I think as we go through this panel, we'll talk a little bit more about the limitations of generative AI like ChatGPT. But I think it's important to recognize that whilst AI has been around, and it has been around in education, we are in a moment in time when there is a difference, not least because it's woken everybody up to the fact that there is this thing called AI. And it's there. It's scaled. It's free, though that might not last. And it's easy to use. It's a bit like that cocky student. Come on, ask me a question. I can answer anything. Just ask me, ask me, ask me. And here we are, and we're all very enthusiastic because, hey, it always comes up with an answer. It's not always right, but it always comes up with an answer. And that's taken things to a fresh level. I'm going to stop there, Nina, because we've got lots of things to talk about. I hope that's answered the question as you wanted.
That was a fantastic overview, right? All right, so let's jump into probably what most of us are familiar with in the academic space. So Thomas, you have been watching ChatGPT closely and using it and watching a lot of conversation with your colleagues and academics around it. I'd love for you to share what you're observing both in your own experiments with ChatGPT and the conversation in the communities that you're part of around ChatGPT.
Okay, thanks, Nina. That is a rather wide-ranging question. Like so many of us here, I got access to ChatGPT just before Christmas. But as Rose has said, this is not brand new technology. The main difference between ChatGPT and the technology we had access to before to generate text is the ease of use. It's the fact it's a chatbot. You can have a back and forth conversation and it will generate words. The words will generally make some kind of grammatical sense. They may not make factual sense. But there's been such a huge amount of media publicity that it is one of the biggest step changes in how our educational systems should work, and it's something that we can't ignore. I've been sat in a classroom before Christmas with students and seen them using ChatGPT to try and get an additional viewpoint or to find out more information about something they're working on. So it's a system that has very legitimate use in the right situation. But the challenge with my academic integrity hat on, which is the area I'm most known for in research, is the fact that this technology can be misused. And at the current time, we don't have a good consensus across the sector about correct use of ChatGPT and about dangerous or misleading use of ChatGPT. But at a very superficial level, if you use this chatbot, then you can ask for an essay, you get an essay back. It may or may not be a good essay. My experience is that in many common subjects where there is a lot of information in the training data set that's been used by ChatGPT, it can produce reasonable answers that will get a pass. It probably can't produce an answer that will get an incredibly high mark. It can't produce something that will deal with the latest knowledge. There may be ways around that if you're smart, but not out of the box. But good in many situations. But what else can you do with this form of technology? The kind of things you might not immediately think about. You can produce PowerPoint slides. Or more specifically, you can produce code, Python code, run the code, you have a set of slides. So if you have a student doing a presentation, there is the presentation. You can produce a script for that presentation, which matches the content of the slides. You can do a certain amount of computer programming. Now, my experience with this is that you do not always get code that works and solves a problem. You need to be enough of a programmer to be able to guide a system like ChatGPT to get good results. But if you know what you need and you understand the basics of programming and you can do that guidance, it can make you incredibly efficient compared to what you were doing before. All kinds of other things you can do. You can use alternative systems and generate art, produce pictures. It's fascinating. But it's not just there from a problematic point of view. Let's think about us as educators, the kind of things that we can do. We could produce our own lecture slides if we wanted, and we are willing to trust the results there. We could produce our own lesson plans, our own module syllabuses with new learning outcomes. We can use it to generate ideas. To me, that is one of the most powerful parts of this technology. As somebody who's a computer scientist, may not be the best creative thinker, but set ChatGPT or another alternative system off, and you can get as many ideas as you want for directions you might go in. So, very powerful tool, and I guess the end point of this part of the conversation to me is that the academic integrity community, and I guess many educators as well, because we often think in the same way, we have to think about how to work with this technology. It's not going to suddenly go away. How to make sure that students are best equipped to use it in the right way, not in a dangerous or misleading way, and not in a way where they're aiming to get an unfair advantage over other students.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Wonderful. So, one more sort of level setting or contextual question for Paul. So Paul, you have, first of all, decades of experience in educational technology, both as a creator yourself and as an advisor to governments and institutions and as a leader of your own institution in this realm and as a teacher in the classroom. What conversations were you having about AI before November, and how have those conversations in your communities changed?
Before November, I've been developing various experiential solutions utilizing some form of AI. I mainly used a lot of Google products, like TensorFlow for building AI models, and Dialogflow to have a sort of an AI chatbot that talks to you and have a conversation. The problems that I had while working with those products back then was that the chatbot would not handle the nuances really well. It asked me questions again to verify, and it just, when it responds to my questions, there were some errors, and sometimes it just cut off, and then it took too long to respond, etc. So I had some issues. And when I saw ChatGPT coming to the market, I saw, wow, this is much better than what I used to deal with. It handled the nuances much better, and the response time was also better as well. So about sometime in January, I was in a classroom with the students, and I asked them, now I think I'm going to change the way that I give students assignments. And I asked the students, I want you to use ChatGPT. You must use ChatGPT and figure out the things that ChatGPT was missing. I want you to find out what's missing and better ways to come up with some innovative ideas. So I'm sort of upping the standards for the students, because now they have to use the ChatGPT, figure out what's coming out of the ChatGPT, and then also come up with ideas that were missing, and also they had to verify if the results are valid and reliable, and they're coming from authentic sources, etc. So they had to explain a lot about their homework and assignments as well. So it kind of required them to not only use the tool, but also come up with explanations, how they arrived at a certain conclusion, a summary, etc. I am particularly interested in the inquiries that they are formulating, because, you know, and when you put prompts and when you put questions, you know what kind of responses you are expecting. If you put poor questions, simple recall questions, you're probably going to get simple answers. And that's why I've been working on a few projects that I tried it for the past 10 years, trying to help students develop better inquiry skills. And I guess I've been right about what I was doing, because now I see that a lot of people are talking, you know, it's not about the answers, it's about how you ask questions to ChatGPT if you want some quality responses from ChatGPT. So we've been having a lot of fun with the students in classrooms, and at the same time I've been thinking about doing a competition. And so I'm going to ask students to come up with assessment strategies that will handle your peer evaluation with ChatGPT. Come up with some brilliant strategies and models and then present it. So students will be presenting their assessment models, leveraging ChatGPT, and they will be challenging their colleagues in the classroom. So it's going to be a lot of fun doing that, asking them to engage in a much, much higher metacognitive level of learning activity. So that's the kind of conversations I've been having with the students. At the same time, with the colleagues of different universities and companies, we've been talking about integrating GPT API calls with existing services. For example, student counseling services, student performance assessment, data analytics, data visualization, and all those existing things that we are doing, and how do we leverage GPT API calls? For those who have not heard API application interface, it's a sort of a connector between your existing solutions and platforms with the API, the AI models as a service. So you could bridge that together and make your existing systems much smarter and intelligent. So those are the kind of conversations I'm having with governments and companies. And lastly, with the government, I've been asked to present the ministers of education about redesigning textbooks for their future. So governments are very much interested in how do we now redesign textbooks that may handle some of the scenario-based learning or what have you in their curriculum. They are now, I guess, getting the pressure from the public about how to redesign the textbooks so that they can engage students in a 21st century level and 21st century quality learning activities and experiences. So it's a very exciting time for someone like me. And then I am literally, like last night, I've been tinkering with the API calls with the GPT, and then I'm very excited to present some of the tools when we get a chance later.
Fantastic, thank you. So, Rose, I'd like to come back to you, and I'm following the conversation, so I'm skipping around a little bit. At this conference, and in conversations I've had outside of it, there's a real recognition that we need to start understanding what human intelligence is and can be, and should be, I should say, and differentiate that from artificial intelligence. And particularly for educators, understanding that difference and figuring out how to lean in, to develop young people's minds to really take advantage of human intelligence. But then nobody really knows or understands the differences between those two things. And you have some perspective on this. If you could help us understand, what can artificial intelligence help us think about as special regarding human intelligence?
Thanks, Nina. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I can only really scratch the surface in the short time that we have today, but it's, I think, the most important question that we should be asking ourselves when we look at tools like ChatGPT. Now, I just want to tell you a short story, because I think this is important in thinking about the limitations of ChatGPT or any AI. So I'm very lucky. I'm blessed with grandchildren. And a few years ago, when my grandson was 5, I was babysitting. Grandparents in the audience will have fond memories of their babysitting experiences. And he was struggling to get off to sleep. So I said, well, look, I'll come and sit in with you. And I was reading a book. So he's lying down, trying to go to sleep. I'm sitting reading my book. And he says, Granny Rose, what are you doing? I said, I'm reading a book. He said, what are you reading? I'm reading Margaret Boden's book on AI. Margaret Boden is a famous philosopher who writes about artificial intelligence. Granny Rose, will you read to me, please, from your book? Okay. This is a serious chapter about consciousness. And he's 5. I read. I get through the first few sentences and he pipes up. Right. So that means my mummy and daddy love me. I read another few sentences. So that means I have a sister called Imogen, and my mummy and daddy love Imogen too. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with what I was reading. The point I'm making is he was trying to make meaning from what I was saying. And that's really important. And I think the fundamental question we must ask ourselves is, what is knowledge? And knowledge is our understanding of the world. It's the way we make meaning about the world. It's the way we make meaning about other people. We make meaning about our understanding of ourselves. And this starts to get at the things that AI cannot do. And that is where we need to focus. Now, I would say, and I think you've got to have a little bit of controversy on a panel, haven't you, Nina?
Absolutely.
We want to get a bit edgy, don't we? So I'm going to say, I think ChatGPT is a knowledge doppelganger. Is it a doppelganger a word that people are familiar with? Yeah, it's a fake. It's an illusion. ChatGPT does not know anything. It's just really good at collating information and persuading us, because of the way it's collated that information, that it has some sort of knowledge. but it has no knowledge of how any of the words it produces apply to the real world. It has no knowledge of itself. I mean, it's got more hubris than Liz Truss. And sorry, that's a very British joke. But Liz Truss was a prime minister who lasted, less than a lettuce, and was super confident that she had all the answers and had never really thought how they might apply in the real world, you know? And so that's what we're looking at. Now, as humans, we can feel, we can sense, we have compassion, we have empathy, we can become self-aware. Now, you said metacognition, Paul. So important, isn't it? Metacognition is the thing we want our students to have, isn't it? We want them to be accurate in their understanding of what they know and what they don't know. We want them to be self-effective, to know how to set goals, how likely they are to be able to reach those goals, how to get help if they can't reach those goals, how to use ChatGPT effectively. So, as humans, we have this amazingly rich intelligence. We have emotional intelligence. We have sensory intelligence. We have intelligence about what knowledge is and what it isn't. We know things about the world. I haven't been to Austin for 20 years, but I didn't have any trouble arriving in Austin, finding my way to the hotel, knowing how to behave here in a conference, because it's just what we do seamlessly. That's impossible for AI at the moment, to be able to move across different locations, to interact with different people, to understand the unwritten rules of what it's like. I mean, bearing in mind I'm on a crutch at the moment, but if I leapt off the stage now, did a few backflips down the centre of the room, sat on Jeremy's knee, you know, had a little conversation over here, side conversation over here, you'd think, ooh, this is a bit odd. This woman doesn't know how to behave in a conference, you know? But I do. I understand the environment. I can respond to the environment I'm in, the people I'm with, what is expected of me. And that's all part of our rich human intelligence. And so I like to think of this as meta-intelligence. We have meta-intelligence. It might be meta-subjective, could be meta-cognitive. We have this, AI does not. The rudimentary forms of metacognition that we can build into our AI systems are absolutely the lowest of the low level. So it's really important that we understand how important it is that we understand ourselves, because that's how we become good at learning. That's how we get the advanced self-efficacy. And that's what we want all of our students to have. And AI does not have that. And so, yes, the importance between human and artificial intelligence is super important. And it's where we need to focus our attention, because then it means we can spot the knowledge doppelganger like ChatGPT. It's very useful, very helpful, definitely part of everybody's lives of the future, but we need to know what it can do and what it can't do. I hope that helps, Nina.
Yes. I see we've gotten to a rhythm of applauding after each response, and they're worthy of applause. Paul, given all that Rose just said about human intelligence, how do our pedagogies, our assessments, our entire approach to education need to change to bring that out of our students?
If you imagine a future work environment for a minute, what kind of work tools do you think that people will have 10, 15 years from now on, when students from elementary school move to go to college and go out to the work? I bet they'll be using all kinds of sophisticated tools that are integrating all types of artificial intelligence. So are we teaching our students the proper things to solve the problems that we'll face in the future? Maybe, maybe not. So we'll have to think about it. We have to see how we can transform our education so that the students are better prepared to solve the real world problems in the future. I love various educational models like project-based learning, team-based learning, problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning. There are so many experiential learning models that we should use. And along the way, there are so many ways to collect new kinds of data that we probably ignored for too many years. And as we know, there are so many digital tools that we are using on a daily basis, and it creates all kinds of digital footprints that could be used to better understand students. So what I would love to see is that if we can use these AI tools to better understand students at the individual level, I think that is very important, individual level. I had a few coaches in my lifetime, meaning professors and teachers in schools, who understood the weaknesses and strength that I bring to the table. And they focused on my strength. And that helped me grow, be on the right pathway to become who I am today. And I would love to utilize technologies of all kinds to better understand. And I think that better understanding can be done a lot with the help of various technology tools that are available today. And I think AI will be one of the significant tool that's playing a role in that ecosystem.
Great, thank you. So that's future thinking, and it's going to take a lot to change our assessment practices. It's going to take a lot to change our curriculum to reflect this. There have been some, of course, immediate responses to the general popularization of generative AI, and particularly around academic integrity. Thomas, you've seen responses, banning, detectors. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and also your thoughts on the efficacy and the appropriateness, if you will, of those sort of more immediate responses?
Yes, certainly, Nina. And there have just been so many immediate reactions to ChatGPT, with everybody thinking we have to take immediate steps to correct this behavior. And I use the word correct quite deliberately, because that is the view that many people seem to have there, that using a system like ChatGPT is somehow wrong and somehow is something that shouldn't be allowed. So what kind of responses do we see? We see bans. We've seen school districts announce bans. I've seen major universities in the UK announce that this technology is banned. How will we ever police that type of situation there? Because we don't want to be a police state. I'm in education because I want the best for students. That's why I asked that question to Nina at the start about how many students in the room. To me, the students are our partners. We are in education. We want them to go into good jobs. We want them to have a valuable life, to feel they've grown as a person by being in education. So taking away the type of technology they'll be using does not help. It's also near impossible. I gave a presentation about ChatGPT and generative AI a couple of weeks ago and found out that the CEO of Microsoft UK was in the audience. And one of the first things she said to me was about how this technology would be in Word very shortly. And I expect that will be released by the end of the year. So this kind of technology is completely unavoidable. And I'm sure we've seen all kinds of news about companies like Snapchat using this technology, or we've seen the version of Bing where you can access a different version of a chatbot. This is just the norm that we will work with. So we can't ban it. We obviously can't ignore it because we are all here today because we know this is something we have to work with. So our option is going to be thinking about how we embrace this technology instead. So I don't recommend, incidentally, that anybody goes out there and relies on the type of AI detection tools that are on the market. There's a few of them. They've had a lot of publicity. My experience from testing them is they can be particularly unreliable. Yes, they may detect things, but they may give false positive results. I read something recently that said the Declaration of Independence was written by AI. And yeah, so unless they're inventing time travel in the next few years and they're going to go away and and change that, and maybe ChatGPT is the solution to inventing time travel. I doubt it, but maybe, unless that happens, then I think this is very dangerous. And I've read about students being accused of cheating with no firm evidence other than something that essentially goes through a black box and then is used to take students to a disciplinary panel or to fail them. It's just not acceptable. We have to have the conversation with students, sure, about what is right to do, what is wrong to do, when can we trust this information, but we can't set out to accuse students unduly of this. So what do we have to do then? We have to work with this. We have to teach students. It's largely echoing things that Paul said as well there about what can the technology do? What can't it do? When does it get things wrong? How do you check the sources for this? What will you do when this technology advances in the next few years? Because the type of AI generation, generative AI we're seeing at the moment, is going to be much enhanced within 12 months' time. And many of the weaknesses we see, which are things like, yes, it may make up references because that happens because of how word patterns happen. Those things are going to go away. The fact that if you were to type in and ask for jokes about Liz Truss into ChatGPT, it's not going to say very much because of when the data stops there. But there are other ways around that. So it is thinking about the future, thinking about the type of jobs that students are going to do. The jobs are still going to be there. They may be different. There may be different efficiencies in how we work. There may be customer service jobs where you don't go out and write every customer email by scratch. You don't go out and write a particularly dangerous email because you're very frustrated about something in your life. You go and get a measured response which you can take away and edit and improve on and then use. So it's thinking about this technology. It's thinking about our own different disciplines because every discipline is different. And we have different approaches, different ways of teaching. And it's thinking about assessments. Can we get students to go away and critique some output from a text generation tool there? Can we get them to go away and modify something? How can we make sure they understand this? And can we just remember as well on top of this that there's a certain amount of randomness in every response. You type the same prompt into ChatGPT 50 times, you'll get 50 different answers. Some of them slightly different, some of them very different, because that's just due to the properties of random seeds and how these results appear. So let's just think about what's appropriate for us, for our students, and to give them the best opportunities going forward.
Thank you, Thomas. So, Rose, what are some of the equity and sustainability concerns we should be thinking about when it comes to AI in educational settings?
That is a really good question. And I think it depends on how we unpack equity and sustainability. So I'm going to look at equity in particular, because I think AI can be super powerful to bring about a more equitable education system. If you think back to what I said right at the start about the kind of AI that's been around for a long time, the way in which we can build adaptive pathways for students that meet them where they are, then we can help students from lots of different backgrounds. And that can really help bring people up and give them an opportunity that they wouldn't have because they're not going to get that one-to-one human interaction. So I think there's huge potential. I think there's potential for something like ChatGPT to help people get started, to help them get over that blank page when you don't know where to begin. And again, that might help a student who's struggling. Students who have got 3 jobs that they have to do and they're looking after children and they're trying to study at the same time and they've got 3 hours and their deadline is there in 3 hours. You know, to have something like ChatGPT and to know how to use it appropriately could be really helpful to get them to progress in their education. But that's the nub, isn't it? It's how we use it appropriately. And that starts to also look at the issue of sustainability as well. Because if we can really work out, as Paul and Thomas have been saying, what we can do positively with these technologies, then we can build sustainable educational models where we can provide better, more tailored education to every student. But it is fundamentally important that we recognize the strengths and weaknesses of the AI. And that goes back to the point about understanding the difference between human and artificial intelligence. We need to work out how we help everybody to understand what AI is. And I don't mean everybody needs to be able to write code, although of course ChatGPT can write the code for you, so it's not so much of a problem. But not a technical understanding, but an understanding of what AI can do and what AI can't do. Because if we can build the way we use AI in education on that basis, and if we can use it to help build our own human intelligence, the types of human intelligence that we can't automate through AI, then I think we have prospects of a really nice, much more equitable system that will be more sustainable. But we have to make the right decisions now. We really do. It's very important.
Paul, how will AI transform education? Or how would you like to see it transform education?
As someone who's been working with the AI and developing tools to help students develop inquiry skills and then come up with better questions, simply, I don't want students to be asking level 1 questions, simple recall questions. I want them to be asking level 5 questions. Level 5 mean creative, hypothetical, and innovative questions that trigger higher order thinking. And then I think that's what we are seeking to achieve in classrooms. It's been very difficult, I know, because Rose just mentioned about equity issues. And so I've developed a system called the SMILE. I've been working on this for quite a while. I never developed a commercial quality product because I do experiments with them, so it's all experimental quality. But the SMILE is acronym for Stanford Mobile Inquiry-Based Learning Environment. And then I emphasize the word mobile because I've been working in the developing countries a lot. I do WhatsApp and Facebook chats with teachers in Tanzania, and I interact with the students in Lebanon who are Syrian refugee children. And I try to give them good quality educational materials. I try to give them new learning models, etc. In some places, they just don't have access to the internet. Some places, they don't have electricity. Then what good is ChatGPT or anything in those regions? So I had to work with a product that runs on a battery-operated server. I use a Raspberry Pi server, and then I house the mobile learning environment program. I put a lot of learning resources around it so that I can give the same quality education program to those children living in underserved and marginalized communities, and that's been my passion. Now, I think there are so many things we need to do to provide quality education to all students of all regions. I think that there are many opportunities if we make things available mobile and then inquiry-based learning for those who may not have access to. So in many ways, there are many ways to transform education. I think better understanding students, personalizing at the individual level. Someone may ask, how does AI help in personalization? I would say my simple answer is, my AI does not forget your child's question. Not a single question. Everything is remembered, even the question your child asked last Friday at 2 p.m. And it can generate all kinds of reports describing what your child is interested in, what your child is asking about, what your child wants to do, what are the things that they love to know more about. If we can tailor education programs and all learning opportunities for all children based on these analytics, I think we can come much closer to providing real personalized learning. And I think this applies to students of all levels, from as young as kindergarten all the way to adults. And I think that this is something that is coming very closely to us, and I think we need to come up with the best practices, and we need some champions. We need some incentive structure to promote innovation in teaching, and so it's going to take a whole village to transform.
Thank you, Paul. Great. So we are going to take questions for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to reserve some time at the end to have a sort of last word from our panelists. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will squint through the lights and direct our producer to you so you can use the mic, because this is being recorded, and so that others can hear you. So any questions for our panelists? This second row, yeah, there you go. And then I see the gentleman 4 rows back on the side. Yeah.
Do I have to stand? Hi, my name is Joanne. I'm from Korea. I teach English to students ranging from K to 9. And Mr. Paul Kim, I actually recognize you from YouTube. You've interviewed with a couple of channels in Korea, so nice to see you. One of the questions that I have, or I have been personally struggling, or maybe even debating with, is the idea of ChatGPT. Like, when do I start telling students about it? Because as an English teacher myself, I've actually tried using it to create content and whatnot, and I feel like using it will really help students, I guess reinforce their learning, right? But some of my students are really young, like as young as 3rd grade, but I sometimes wonder if me explaining it will help, and in a way, I just don't know how to, explain it to a level that is understandable for 3rd graders. So, since all of you here are professionals, maybe, how should I go about explaining the idea of AI to a young person as young as 3rd grader? Thank you.
Paul, please.
Okay. I think you want to explain to your students yesterday. The reason is, I think you want to introduce them these tools and have them spend some time with it. And then if you're an English teacher, I can think of so many possible activities you can engage your students to learn with. And I think you can explain that ChatGPT, sort of a generative AI tools, are not perfect. It can be as bad at best. It can be a friend, a machine friend that can help you understand concepts, or you can have your students to tell ChatGPT to explain certain things for 3rd graders, and then it will explain that for a 3rd grader level. So there's so many activities, and I think what's important is that not to just take it as is and trust, but help students develop the analytical skills, question it, verify it, compare it, and so that the students learn to develop the skill sets, how to work with the Gen AI or any AI tools that will be coming down the pipe. So with that sort of a competency that they build, I call this new AI competency for 21st century, and I think that's what they need to start building as early as possible, because we're going to see just way more tools like this, as we grow up and get out to the workplace. So I think sooner the better, in my view, absolutely. At the same time, do not let them just trust everything that they hear from it. They need to build the awareness along, so that will be important.
Thank you, Paul. If there's still a question from the gentleman on the aisle. Oh, you got it, thanks.
Hi, thank you guys so much for all of this wonderful information. My name's Rome Harris. I founded a company called Coachable AI in 2019, and it developed a few different AI models, a lot of theoretical models. So my question is, how do new AI developers leverage existing infrastructures and technology like ChatGPT, which is trained on Project Gutenberg, Wikipedia, Reddit, all of these sources, for new developers who maybe don't have access to databases that are so large and expansive? What's the best way, and what are some of the tools for new entrepreneurs in the space?
Rose, is that a question you can take?
Well, I think it's probably more of a question for Paul, but I just want to say something and then pass on to Paul about anybody wanting to develop any kind of tool that uses AI. The most important thing when building any kind of AI system is the imperative for the AI. And by that I mean, why are you using AI? Why is AI the thing that's going to enable you to do something that you can't do without AI? And is that something you really want to do? Because that's what really matters. And the same AI can be used to do very different things. And so the imperative is the most important thing. And I'll just give a very specific, very short example. So, for example, I said right at the start that we have AIs that can interpret facial expressions. And we know that the combination of voice and facial expression is much more accurate when it comes to interpreting emotion. So say I build a system for young students because I really want to help students who are struggling. And I want to identify the fact that they're struggling as early as possible. So I build my system and I interpret voice and facial expression, and then I pinpoint when it's most appropriate for me as the human teacher to step in and give them the encouragement they need. Now, that very, very same AI technology could also be used to weed out the students who are struggling, because I don't want to waste my time on them, because I'm only interested in the strongest of the students. The AI is exactly the same. The imperative is totally different. So I just want to make that point, that it's the imperative that really matters. Now I'm going to pass to Paul for the more technical explanation.
Sure,
in
thank
answer
you.
to your question.
So I like to coin I don't know if it is a new term or not, but meta AI. Have you heard that already?
It's all yours, Paul.
It's
You
mine
got it.
now. I can claim it. All right. Meta AI is something that I just came to my mind when you were asking the question. So the way that I build the tools is I have access to various AI. ChatGPT is included. What I'm doing is I get responses from multiple sources and I compare them and mix them to come up with a better response. So that if you're using directly ChatGPT, you know what you're going to get from ChatGPT, the kinds and levels of quality and so forth. But what I'm adding to, the value that I'm adding to this whole thing is that because I'm comparing the responses from multiple AI tools and then comparing with the model that I built and then compare it and see which one's better at the end. And I provide the final response. And that's exactly what I built lately. And so I would love to continue our dialogue and focus on meta AI as a new concept.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This in the second row, about midway through. Great.
Hello, thank you all. We're just talking about the intention we have using and preparing IA, and there's some friends that told, and in Brazil they put on press something, that a guy was asking IA, who had built you, what intention do you have, and asking questions about herself. And she was, you are a very curious guy, and I think you are very smart, but I think you can harm me. So I'm going to be careful with you, and you should be careful with me and what I can do with you. And he printed it, but half an hour it was erased. So how can we prepare for this kind of things to happen?
Yeah, maybe others in the room have read the New York Times story by Kevin Roos, where he had, in his terms, well, I may not be quoting, but sort of a very eerie interaction with one of the A's. I think it was ChatGPT. And he started asking questions of it, and it seemed self-aware. And I think this is, I'd much rather have the panelists respond. When I read that, I thought, but this is predictive text. So is it being self-aware? I think the answer is no, but I'd much rather turn to this group. Okay, what is happening? What happened?
Well, let's say frankly, AI is not self-aware, and we don't really want to be in the situation where we are controlled by AI. We want to be able to work with AI. The thing is, the AI will do what you tell it to. So if you ask the AI to act in a certain way and to continue a conversation in a certain way, it will do that. If you ask it to be creepy, then it will have a creepy conversation. If you ask it to lie, it will lie. if you use it in, say, a customer service role and you ask it to promote whatever service you are trying to sell at the end of each line of conversation, it will do that because it's not intelligent. It is just doing what you told it to do. And so this can be abused. You see examples all over social media of people who have set up carefully prepared situations and then shown part of the output during that process, showing something that you may not want. You may be able to force AI to provide racist remarks. That can certainly happen. To provide other types of offensive remarks. We've seen that happen. There are various ways to do it. It is incredibly dangerous, and that's why one of the core skills we have to teach our students is how to use AI ethically there, because this is not a new problem. There have always been bias in AI systems. Very hard problem to solve. And when we think back perhaps to some of the questions we had earlier about supporting our students throughout their entire learning journey from a young age upwards, we have to work out what's appropriate for them at those different stages of life. So our students who are using AI when they're 5 or 6 years old, they're not going to be reading and writing. They have to interact with AI in a different way. So we have to think about what might they do that will be useful for them. Things like generative art, perhaps that's useful. Things like getting AI to tell stories. Things like speaking to AI and just guiding them through that pathway. I don't teach K to 12. I teach at university level, and I would not want to take on that incredibly demanding and important job, even with ChatGPT to help me, because you need special training, and AI can never replace that human intuition that we have as part of the process. But we just have to think about how we will teach our students and how we will work with AI with all its potential weaknesses.
Thank you. So I'm going to invite the panelists to provide a last thought. And I just want to remind you, because there were a few questions remaining, is that afterwards we will leave the stage and go to the back corner of the room so that others can set up for the next session, and we will answer some questions if you have them. So I invite you to join us back there afterwards. But just to wrap up, in 30 seconds or less, if we could get some final thoughts. And I'm going to start down with you, Thomas, and work this way.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. I think you got many of my final thoughts wrapped up in that last long monologue there. But let's use AI in a positive way. Let's not just think about all the challenges to our current educational system. This is a step change. We will have to work with it. We had a forced step change during COVID. Thankfully, we are through the worst of that. This is a more opportunity for a measured step change and to use this to benefit students, not to work against them.
I'd like to incentivize best practices as much as possible. We need more nimble champions who can demonstrate academic excellence leveraging AI for all. And we'd love to see more of those champions out there.
Thank you. Rose?
Absolutely. Embrace it, play with it, but recognize it for what it is. And remember, what you're seeing now is built by big companies who are out to make money. So be careful.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists for their thoughts, and thank you all for coming and staying engaged. Again, we'll see you in the back of the room if you have questions. Have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you.